Today on CityCast DC, it's kind of an emergency. We're talking about the latest in the Potomac River sewage spill, which Mayor Muriel Bowser of DC has now declared an emergency. Plus, Maryland and Virginia versus ICE, a union catfight at a kiddie cafe, and in a members-only fourth segment, we're going to get into the lawsuit against Donald Trump for allegedly trying to steal DC's golf courses. I'm joined by my CityCast colleague, Julia Caron, and by Mark Seagraves from NBC4. Today is Friday, February 20th. I'm Michael Schaefer, and here's what DC is talking about. Hey, Mark.
Hey, good morning, Michael. Good morning, Julia. Thanks for having me again.
Hey, Julia.
Hey, Mike. What's up, dude?
So listen, before we get started, you might have heard the first episode of our new podcast, Your City Could Be Better. Each week, CityCast CEO David Plotz sits down with one of the hosts across all of the cities in the CityCast network and talks about big changes, small gripes, and how cities can learn from each other. The latest episode will be up in our feed on Sunday. It's all about a data center moratorium in Madison, Wisconsin. A conversation you're probably familiar with, given that Northern Virginia's position as the data center capital. Check it out. So, Mark, you have been all over, so to speak, the
man on it, the man on the inside. It's wild.
The Potomac sewer leak. I think I have said so to speak more often in relation to this story than most. But Muriel Bowser on Wednesday night declared this an emergency. Can you just sort of, for people who haven't been sniffing it, can you sort of give a state of play? What's happened and where are we now?
Yeah, so very quickly on January 19th, there was an underground pipe. It's called the Interceptor that runs from Dulles all the way down to Blue Plains, carrying about anywhere from 40 to 60 million gallons of raw sewage a day to the treatment facility, and it ruptured, causing the scene that we've seen on TV over and over again, spewing to date 243.5 million gallons of raw sewage and wastewater into the Potomac River. The good news is that DC Water, and I will give anyone at DC Water who wears a hard hat and a reflective vest and boots to work an A+ for this, because their engineering work, working through the blizzard, working this workaround to keep the sewage from going into the river is truly, as David Gaddis called it, miraculous. I mean, it's really a great effort and a good temporary workaround. That still leaves 40 million gallons of raw sewage a day flowing through the C&O Canal in an open-air pit, and it'll be like that for at least 4 to 6 weeks before they get this pipe fixed. They've run into a couple of problems along the way. In the meantime, testing of the river has shown various levels of E. coli, MRSA, and staph from the spill site, which is just below the 495 bridge that goes over the river in Cabin John, as far down as Georgetown. So the most recent numbers, though, show a trend of the E. coli levels going down, and in some cases, significantly going down. So all of that is great news. The problem is the ice is melting, the snow is melting, we've got rain coming, and we do not have this disaster behind us.
Yeah, you said anyone with a hard hat and a vest, you applaud. What about the people not in hard hats and
vests?
So
I would give anyone who wears a suit and tie to work at DC Water a less than favorable grade. They have been anything but transparent. They have, I will not go so far as to say that they've intentionally misled the public, but they have had this argument with the DC Water officials that, from my perspective, and I have been covering this fairly closely since day one, they have not done a good job of communicating with the public. And at times they put out a daily report every single day. Kudos to them for doing that. But the way that it's worded quite often, if you're a casual reader, if you're not staying on top of this, if you're a rushed journalist in a busy newsroom, it's easy to misinterpret some of their things. And so in the early days, you had people thinking it was contained when it's really never been contained, and this still is not contained.
One of the reasons for this sort of sense of calm also was that, you've talked about the suits at DC Water and the hard hats at DC Water, but the level above them, which is to say the entire plethora of local elected officials, there was no sense that this was like an emergency or an ecological disaster. There were not press conferences. There was not grandstanding. It was kind of nothing until President Trump accused them of being at fault, which they reject. They say this was on federal property and the feds have known about this. But why was there such silence from people who actually can command the bully pulpit?
I think a couple of things. One, it came right about the same time as we had the horrible snow and ice storm. And that was really distracting, everybody's attention, both the journalists who didn't cover it and the governments who didn't respond. But you're absolutely right. In the first weeks of the crisis, local governments from DC to county to state and even the federal government, nobody really did it. Everybody pointed to DC Water to the point where the first time I tried to interview Mayor Bowser about 3 days after the spill at a press conference, she said she had not been briefed. And then I talked to her city administrator, Kevin Donahue, and the director of HCMA, Clint Osborne, and both of them on camera said to me, this is a Maryland problem. It happened in Maryland. It's not a DC issue. And Kevin Donahue went so far on camera to publicly state it's been contained. And he couldn't have been more wrong about that. And I don't know why or how he got that misinformation. But that's what you had in the early days. And it was weeks before the DC government, Department of Environment, even started doing its own testing. Montgomery County has done almost nothing. Maryland Department of Environment started doing testing and putting in restrictions on shell fishing. But this was weeks into it after the Potomac River Keeper and the University of Maryland started releasing their results. And then finally, the Corps of Engineers had a press conference releasing their test results. All of which showed elevated E. coli downriver, again, as far down as Fletcher's and into Georgia. And then as recently as this week, you had the director of the DC Department of Environment, Richard Jackson, briefing the DC Council side by side with DC Water. And I swear I thought he was a DC Water employee because he was so in lockstep with DC Water in this briefing, but he went completely off reservation and told the council it's safe to eat the fish. And he wasn't concerned. He said it was safe to eat the fish out of the Potomac River. He talked about how he likes to fry them up. Then he talked about he wasn't concerned about the elevated E. coli numbers because they were below 410 is the limit for safe human contact. And they were anywhere from the single digits up to 397 in different places in DC. And he said, as long as it's under 410, I'm fine, I'm happy. And then when I tried to question him about this, as he left that room, the briefing with the council, he literally scurried away with one of Mayor Bowser's staffers, wouldn't let him talk to us. And 2 hours later, issued a statement basically recanting what he said and said, oh yeah, the advisory is still in place. You shouldn't eat the fish. You shouldn't come into contact with the water. And then 24 hours later, Mayor Bowser declares an emergency. And I can tell you why she did it when she did it. Late at night, we all got a notice about 20 minutes before the press briefing at 7:00 at night. And that is because the clock was about to expire. In order to declare a presidential declaration of an emergency, and a state has to declare the emergency first within 30 days of the incident occurring. And yesterday was 30 days. If they waited till today, it would have been too late to declare that emergency. And that's why we had that rush press conference Wednesday night with Lindsay Appiah, the deputy mayor, laying out the mayor's order and the declaration of emergency, which really seems to be more about money and funding and getting reimbursed for fixing and cleaning up than really dealing with the hands-on work of remediation and repair.
All right, Mark, let's get into adjudicating the blame because that's what we like to do. This leak took place in the state of Maryland. The place of the leak was Clara Barton Parkway, i.e. federal land. And it is the pipe is run by DC Water, if I understand correctly. Who runs DC Water?
DC Water is one of these quasi-governmental agencies that is overseen both by the EPA and by local and state governments. They're answerable to DC, Maryland, and Virginia, who are their customers who get their water from them. The EPA certainly regulates, as they do everywhere, water utilities around the country. But there's been a lot of misinformation about this scenario in the back and forth between President Trump and Governor Wes Moore. You know, to specifically blame Wes Moore for the deterioration of the pipes is, not fair. But the president was somewhat correct when he pointed out what we already talked about, that there'd been a lack of response by the state governments in D.C., Maryland, and Virginia, which are all led by Democrats. But when Wes Moore pointed back to it being a federal problem, that's not necessarily correct either. The federal government did build the pipeline originally 60 years ago, before there ever was a DC Water. But DC Water now is in control of that pipe. They operate the pipe. They maintain the pipe. They use the pipe. It services DC, Maryland, and Virginia, and mostly Maryland and Virginia. And so the responsibility of care and upkeep of this pipeline is that of DC Water. And DC Water is located in DC and is answerable to Mayor Bowser and the DC Council.
Among others.
Among others, absolutely. Correct. And you saw them testify before the Maryland House of Delegates last week. DC Water did. And so this is a regional problem. We're seeing all this talk about a regional response, but if you look deeply what they're saying, they're talking about coordination and monitoring, and most of these people haven't even actually been out to the site. I don't believe any of the governors or Mayor Bowser. I know Kevin Donahue finally went out to the site, the city administrator for DC. I know some city council members.
I think it's an old rule of politics that don't let yourself get photographed with a sewer full of crap behind you.
Probably not bad advice, but here we are now, a month after this happened, and all of a sudden, it's national news. The New York Times, networks. I did a network hit for NBC 2 days ago, and so now it's big national news, as you said, mostly because President Trump put out a post on social media saying FEMA was going to take over. The White House walked that back and said they may take over if they have to. We know now FEMA and EPA have now visited the site for a tour or inspection. And then you had DC, Maryland, Virginia, and DC Water all summoned to the White House Wednesday afternoon for a meeting with EPA. And I'm told those were mostly lower level officials at that meeting. But right after that meeting, Mayor Bowser comes out and declares this emergency.
Okay, so Wes Moore, the governor of Maryland, has tweeted to Trump, "Do your job." Notice reports that, according to emails they got access to, the feds were aware of problems with this interceptor pipe a couple of years ago. There's not a whole lot of evidence that EPA and FEMA have jumped on it until the president put out that tweet. There's actually not that much evidence they've jumped on it since then either. How right or wrong is Moore to point the finger back at Trump?
More wrong than right in that, because it really is DC Water. So DC Water has inspected this miles and miles and miles, again, from Dulles down to DC through Maryland. Over the past 5 years, they've inspected more than 90% of that pipe. And each segment of pipe is given a score of between 1 and 5. 1 being it's in perfect condition, 5 being it's in critical condition. We know now that the segment of pipe that ruptured in 2021 was rated at 3.5 on that scale. So certainly not in excellent condition, but not critical emergency condition. But again, that was, almost 5 years ago that they did that most recent testing. I have asked, and they said they're going to provide, but again, DC Water is slow with its transparency. I've asked for those reports for the entire section to see if there are sections that were rated worse than this section. Now, they have a capital improvement plan, CIP. You're going to hear the acronym CIP a lot from DC Water. It's a 3-year plan to repair and upgrade this entire underground connector line. And this segment was scheduled to be upgraded next year in 2027. They are now going to do it right now because they have it excavated. And so after the 4 to 6 weeks to repair the pipe, they're going to spend another 9 months doing the upgrade that was supposed to happen and was funded for 2027.
Mark, this reaction and the your implicit criticism here about the communications really does dovetail with a lot of the criticism of the Bowser administration going back, which is to say defensive, prickly, lack of communication, et cetera. And it is one of those moments where like communication and transparency is the leader's job. So I expect there's a lot of people who are not necessarily going to believe stuff they're saying. But as far as based on government or other sources, talk about the drinking water.
Drinking water is fine. So here's our situation with our drinking water, right? There are 3 intakes for the drinking water for our region. And 2 of them are at Great Falls, and they're intake valves that suck in millions and millions of gallons of water every day, ship it down to Blue Plains. That system, it's really an ingenious system. It works on gravity. So it doesn't depend on electricity, and the flow of water just keeps it running. And that's where we get the vast majority of our water there. And that intake is above where the spill was. And so that is the best news in this whole scenario. Little Falls pumping station that people are familiar with is the secondary intake. There's one intake there. It runs on electricity. It is below the break. So it has been shut down since the day of the break. It cannot and will not be used until all of this is figured out and solved. We just have to keep fingers crossed that nothing goes wrong with the Great Falls 2 intakes up there. But because of that, there really has been no impact on our drinking water. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, which runs the Washington Aqueduct, which runs those intake valves at Great Falls and Little Falls, are testing the water daily at those locations. And as are people like the Potomac River Keeper and DC Water. And they have found consistently throughout this that the E. coli and bacteria levels at the intake are way low, in fine shape. You're always, E. coli, it goes up and down depending on the flow, the tide, the rain, but all well within safe limits. So that is the good news. But look, if this this pipe does go above Great Falls, if it were to have ruptured above Great Falls,
we'd be in big doo-doo, literally and figuratively.
That's correct, yes.
So I have been going to South by Southwest in Austin, Texas every year for a minute, and it's truly one of the highlights of my whole year. I go to a ton of conferences and events, and it feels like a whirlwind of lanyards and talks, and I leave actually feeling exhausted, like, hey, I showed up but have no takeaways. South by Southwest is different because I actually leave feeling nourished and energized for new ideas. Because South by Southwest is where the world's most creative, inspired, and eclectic minds gather to shape what's next. It's the ultimate gathering for the global creative community, where thought leaders, filmmakers, musicians, and other professionals across industries share the same space. And this year, I will actually be there talking about how we can make sense of this very particular moment we're all in media and culture. Innovation, film and TV, music and culture all collide when the 2026 South by Southwest conferences and festivals take over Austin, Texas, this March 12th through March 18th. For one eclectic week, the city becomes a playground for boundary-pushing ideas, world premieres, and live performances that turn into beneficial experiences. I once went to a secret pop-up concert of Solange Knowles at South by Southwest that genuinely changed my life. At South by, you can gain access to new ideas, people, and opportunities that do not happen anywhere else. So start planning your adventure in Austin and secure your badge now at sxsw.com/DC.
All right, so I want to talk about another news story this week, and it's actually going to be related, which is that both Maryland and Virginia have passed laws or issued regulations limiting police law enforcement cooperation with ICE. And the reason it's related is that Trump and the Republicans have been eager to blame Democratic governance for the sewer leak or for the botched response to the sewer leak, at least. And there's a strong sense that he has other fish to fry with them, so to speak. Sorry.
Maybe not Potomac River fish, but who's to say?
Or perhaps.
Or perhaps.
What do these changes mean in terms of the what Maryland, Virginia are having their law enforcement do or not do?
So as far as I can tell, basically, it limits their police interaction with ICE specifically. So Wes Moore signed a law basically that prohibits immigration enforcement agreements with the federal government. He isn't the first guy to do this. There were laws banning cooperative agreements with ICE signed in New Mexico. They took effect in Maine last month. Kathy Hochul in New York is also backing legislation that would ban local law officers from being deputized by ICE. Basically, this is trying to be a line in the sand between using local law enforcement to coordinate with ICE. And my big question about this is what is DC doing anything about this? Because Maryland and Virginia seem to be on one side of this,
I think you're right. I think that, the district is in a unique position. They're not a state. We've already seen the president come in and federalize the police department. The task force, the Safe and Beautiful task force, is still in effect. But I will say, just anecdotally, in D.C., I can't remember the last time I heard about an incident where D.C. police assisted with an immigration detention. That's not to say it's not happening. I'm sure it probably is happening, but incidents of that, as with just overall incidents of crime coinciding with the snowstorm, have gone down a lot. And it just, as we see in Minneapolis, the withdrawal of ICE, after the killing of two innocent people at protests by ICE agents, just from the chief seats, it kind of feels like the Trump administration is kind of tampering, winding down a little bit as we head closer to the midterms. And so I don't know if any of those things are connected, but in DC, you're not going to see, I think pretty clearly, I can see the DC Council trying to pass some type of legislation. I can't see Mayor Bowser signing it. I think she is going to ride out her final year cooperating with the White House to try to fend off any assaults on home rule or any further takeover. And as you said, just trying not to make eye contact with the Trump administration, not to pick a fight and just let them, leave DC alone. And I think that's her strategy going forward.
But look, I can't say enough how, from the president's political point of view, if they've determined that picking fights with Democrats is good politics for them, which I don't think I don't know that they're right about that. But Moore and Abigail Spanberger, the governor of Virginia, are incredibly appealing targets. And I got to say, whatever the right or wrong of Trump and Wes Moore blaming one another for the spill, that was some ugly stuff. And in his statement, he singles out Moore and talks about the Democratic war on merit, which is like a dog whistle of dog whistles for the only black governor. That's some ugly ass stuff.
Well, this is not the first time we've seen those dog whistles out of the Trump administration, and it is ugly and it's a distraction. Although back to the sewage, it has moved the needle, as you'd say, on attention and exposure to this problem. I mean, I was sitting alone in meetings for weeks on this, and now it's a crowded, there's national reporters competing on this story. So it has at least served that purpose.
Okay, one story that national reporters are probably not competing on, even the long neglected labor beat, is the story of Crumbs and Whiskers Cafe, as reported by Washingtonian this week. Crumbs and Whiskers, for those of you who don't know, was a coffee shop in Georgetown where you could sit and have baked goods and coffee and cuddle with kittens, of which there were many in the cafe. There was some dissatisfaction by the employees. They organized a union, and a week later, the place shuts its doors indefinitely. The union says, or the workers say, this is union busting. But it's all taking place at a kitty cafe.
Have either of you been to a cat cafe, by the way? Either of you?
No, but my children have.
Your children have.
It's
Okay.
on my bucket list.
On your bucket list. Okay. Mike, what have your children said about these cat cafes, if they've said anything to you about it?
They said they were appalled by the mistreatment of labor and that they will never cross a picket line again.
And that there's only one entrance and exit, and that's a fire hazard because it's in the basement. We agree. No, okay. So for people who haven't or don't understand what cat cafes are, I actually think they're like very interesting and cool models where basically they partner with a local shelter and they have these cats where you can adopt the cats in the store. Apparently, according to the staff, the cafe helped more than 3,000 cats get their forever homes. That's awesome. We love that. One of the things that workers, I think, were concerned about was in a video post online, one worker said they were required to work ill with pneumonia and bronchitis. There were also issues with some of the animals. So, like, if you don't have a vet on staff and a cat is having an incident, a medical emergency, bringing someone in is really difficult. And so that was not ideal. But have you all, I don't know. My view on this is I'm allergic to cats, so I haven't actually been inside a cat cafe, although I will, Benadryl up when I go. I don't know. Do you guys think this is a loss for Georgetown or for people who want to adopt cats or anything like that?
I mean, insofar as there was people, not including me, who like going to cafes where you can nuzzle with cats, then yes, any closure of a store is a loss. I think the workers should go. You know how like there's that thing where unions will deploy an inflatable rat in front of a non-union scab workplace. I think they should go deploy an inflatable cat in front of the cafe.
Do you want it to knock the inflatable rat, hunt it? Is that the goal here?
Exactly.
Like an animatronic,
I will just say I've been, interest of full disclosure, I have been a card-carrying union member for more than 25 years and am very happy about my pension that awaits me in a matter of not enough days. So, I am pro-union and I support unions and the ability to unionize and to organize as a labor force. But let me ask, are these kitty cafes, are these a chain? Is it just one solo?
There's one in LA and one in Washington. And this, I mean, it is a phenomenon that exists elsewhere too, but of this group.
Well, I look forward to them reopening with union staff so I can go check out the kitty cat.
You will not cross a picket fee line.
Ha ha ha!
Hey.
10 points for Gryffindor.
He's here all week.
There it is. It was worth the wait.
Okay, today paid subscribers get a bonus 4th roundup chat. We're going to talk about a lawsuit against the president regarding DC's golf courses. It's a subject we've talked about for a couple times before on CityCast, and there's some actually interesting legal movement in there. If you want to be sure you always get the full episode, become a member. Head to membership.citycast.fm and sign up. It's only $10 a month, and members get ad-free listening, exclusive members events, and an extra events newsletter every week. Again, that's membership.citycast.fm. That's all for today here on CityCast DC. Our production team this week was Annie Reese, Julia Karen, Ash Durbin, and Lizzie Goldsmith. Newsletter editor Kayla Cote-Stemmerman wrote our fabulous newsletter, CityCast DC, this week. And our hosts are Bridget Todd and me, Michael Schaefer. Music is by Alex Roldan, with additional music from Rosedale from Triple Scoop Music via Getty Images. If you enjoyed the show and you're sick of talking about sewage, why not change the subject and talk about CityCast instead? We'll be back Monday morning with more news from around the city. Bye.